In this video, we're going to discuss advanced order and transfer schedule options for your forecast in SoStock. Before you watch this video, please make sure that you have started the onboarding mini course that you go through and do some of these basic tutorials at help.sostock.com. Just click up here. Specifically, is how to set up your forecast. This goes over about 85% of how you need to set up your forecast to get the most out of SoStock. This tutorial that we're making now is advanced options and the different options that you have for orders and transfer schedules. So before we get into each one, let me just kind of give you an overview of the 5 major types of order and transfer schedule options. So number 1 is we've got the default setting, which is a fixed order schedule and a fixed transfer schedule. Fixed meaning it's set to a specific cadence, like every month, every 6 months, every 5 weeks, whatever it is. You can choose, when you go into your order schedule, you can choose a period of time and a starting date. That's called fixed and fixed. The next one is order direct to Amazon, and that's all predicated on your lead time. The third type is what's called as needed. As needed, we also call this min-max restocking. If you click as needed, instead of setting a cadence or a fixed order schedule, you're determining when to place your orders based on your minimum and your maximum amount of warehouse inventory. Now, if you're going direct to Amazon, you would set a minimum and maximum FBA stock. If it's grayed out, that means that your lead time does not end at FBA, it ends at a warehouse. That's why you can't set your maximum order schedule, because you're ordering to a warehouse, not to Amazon. And the other one, it'd be as needed warehouse transfers with buffer stock. We'll talk about that. And then finally, what's called a pass-through lead time. So let's go through each one in more detail. So the fixed order schedule is fixed monthly and weekly. You can set, like I said before, you can set the beginning date, and you set your buffer stock here either in days or in units. I always recommend to set your buffer stock in days. Very few people use the units option. The system is going to tell you how much you need to order to stock up to 1 month's worth of sales based on your projected velocity, so that at the end of that order cycle, you're going to have 30 days worth of inventory at Amazon. And if you want to keep some buffer stock at your warehouse, you can put it there as well. That one's pretty straightforward. I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's talk about as needed direct to Amazon. So that means that if your lead time went to Amazon instead of to a warehouse, let's just go ahead and set that up so I can explain it. So now we're ordering to Amazon. In this case, when you have an as needed order schedule, and I'll change this to as needed, whether you do as needed or fixed, actually, the system is ignoring your warehouse needs. So it doesn't matter if I put, I want 30 days worth of buffer stock here at my warehouse. Since my lead time is bypassing the warehouse, the system is never going to replenish the warehouse. So very important. If I have inventory at my warehouse, the system will still tell me to transfer inventory. But if my lead time goes to Amazon, as you can see down here, all of my new order recommendations are now in the Take FBA Action column instead of the Order to Warehouse column, because this is predicated on my lead time. Now, let's talk about as needed ordering, and we'll start with Amazon, and then we'll talk about as needed to a warehouse. As soon as I click as needed, and if my lead time ends at Amazon, you will see that these 2 boxes now open up, specifically this one. And if I set my buffer stock to 30, you'll probably notice that this number is always going to be 5 days or units above whatever the smaller number is. That's the default. The default is you cannot have as needed with a spread of less than 5 days. The reason being is how all of this works is instead of ordering every month or every week, we're ordering based on how much inventory you need to reach this maximum number, and then at the end of that order cycle to get down to the minimum number. So in this case, let's say I want to stock up to 90 days worth of inventory, but I always want to have at least 30 days. Now what's going to happen is the spread, which is the number of days between 30 and 90, is more or less going to determine my frequency. That would be about every 2 months. Let's go ahead and save this and see what happens. And while this is loading, I want to point out that the min-max numbers at the warehouse are completely ignored. These order recommendations here are going to be based off of what I need at Amazon, not based on anything at the warehouse, because our lead time is bypassing the warehouse. So even though the system is telling me to transfer 210 units, I also need to order an additional 640. In order for this to make sense, we should export our timeline here, and that will give us our min-max numbers. We want to show you how these numbers are calculated. So it's very important to look at, since this is going direct to Amazon, we need to look at these two columns here, my FBA minimum and my FBA maximum. Now, right now I am using a fixed velocity. So this is pretty straightforward. My velocity is we'll just call that 7 units a day. So basically my minimum number is going to be 7 times 30 and my maximum is going to be 7 times 90. And those numbers are calculated and displayed in this column here. The reason why it's important to look at this column is because if I had any kind of seasonality or lightning deals or future sales spikes programmed into my inventory timeline, these numbers are going to change. So every single day, the way the system is calculating my minimum and my maximum number is it's adding up the daily velocity for the next 30 days, which is my minimum, or 90 days, which is my maximum. So if I were to take 7 and add 30 days, and you can see I've got a lightning deal in there as well. If I added up the count 30, if you look down here on the bottom, that's 30 days. The sum is 611. So since these are partial numbers like 7.003, it's rounding to 610, but you get the idea. So my minimum buffer stock for October 1st is 7. I'm sorry, my minimum buffer stock on October 1st, 2023 is 610. And if I added up 90 days, which includes that lightning deal in there and any variations in my velocity, if I had seasonality turned on, I'll add up 90. 1033. And if we go back up here, again, we're using partial numbers like 7 point whatever. So we're rounding it to 1032. That's what Excel does. Close enough. So keep that in mind, that every single day, the system is calculating your minimum and your maximum based on adding up those many days worth of velocity, including seasonality, lightning deals, sales spikes, etc. That's why it's important to, if you're ever questioning these order numbers, download your inventory timeline and actually compare it. And I'll show you how to do that. So let's look at this timeline. This order recommendation says it's going to arrive on December 6th based on my 77-day lead time. 77 days from today, which is September 20th, is December 6th. So let's scroll down to December 6th. You can see we're going to have a stock out there because we only had 210 units to transfer. When this inventory arrives on December 6th, why is it only going to 640? Didn't Ari just tell me in the video that my maximum number was 1032? Well, it was 1032 on October 1st, but let's go to December 6th on the inventory timeline. So we'll scroll down to December 6th. We'll highlight this row, and let's add up 90 days worth of inventory here. You can see there's an 8 in there. We'll just add up 90, count on the bottom. You don't have to do this every time. I just want to show you how it's calculating these numbers so you can learn to trust the system and how to cross-check it. Now we have 633 as our max. And you can see I'm only adding that up to show you that this number here is correct. So our minimum and our maximum is now 210 and 632 versus what it was before because we don't have any future lightning deals or seasonality in there. That's why it's stocking me up to 640. Now, why is it 640 instead of 632, you might ask? Well, this is where other issues come into play. We have packaging info, 20 units per carton. This number always has to be divisible by units of 20. We also have an MOQ of 500. So let's say my maximum was only 400 and the system tells you to order 500. Before you contact me at support, go look at these here and make sure that these are not influencing your order recommendations as well. Anyway, so that is the order transfer, the order schedule for as needed straight to Amazon. Let's talk about the next one, which is as needed to the warehouse with transfers and min-max buffer stock at the warehouse. I'm going to pause the video while I set this up. This is probably the most common order schedule and transfer schedule, and that's having an as-needed order schedule with a lead time that goes direct to a warehouse and then transferring from the warehouse into Amazon either as needed or on a weekly schedule or a monthly schedule. So in this case, that's what we're going to use as an example. So how are these numbers calculated now? It's the exact same way. The system is simply calculating how many days on that export, which I'm not going to show you again. It's adding up 30 days for my buffer stock and 90 days for my maximum stock at the warehouse, or whatever numbers I put in here. So it's always going to try to stock me up to the maximum and try to get me down to the minimum. If I leave this number at 0, the system will always try to get me as close to 0 as possible while maintaining 30 days worth of inventory at Amazon. Sometimes it's not possible to get to 0 based on my lead time and my transfer time. Here's an example. Now it's telling me to order 880 units, and let's see what happens. By the way, the reason I have 10 units just sitting in the warehouse here is because I have cartons of 20, and the system cannot transfer 10 units when I have this turned on. If that bothers you, you can turn this off. Round up to nearest carton for transfers, just turn that off. And then you can transfer partial cartons. So now you see that it's transferring all 210, which is a partial carton. And now the order schedule is the order recommendation is a little different. Okay, so my order comes in here, and I'm going to transfer as needed based on my weekly transfer and my 30 days of buffer. Transfer, transfer, transfer. Now notice that as needed, my next order recommendation isn't until December, because that 90 days worth of inventory should last me a couple of months. So now I've got a 71-day lead time, and let's see what happens. By the time that inventory arrives, I'm virtually at 0, which is exactly what I want on my as-needed min-max warehouse order schedule. Let's go through the next order cycle. Same thing. I'm almost at 0. Now, sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's impossible to get to 0. Why is that? Look carefully. I have to transfer 49 units on June 7th in order for this to happen, in order to hit my min-max numbers here with my 10-day transfer time. If this number is bigger than that number, we have to have more inventory come in before this number gets to the lowest point. Does that make sense? In other words, there's no way for this inventory to get to 0 and still be able to transfer 49 units, which would in turn make the min-max happen at FBA if I actually allow this to go to 0. So when you have conflicting settings here in the calculation variables, sometimes you're going to get a violation of your minimum or your maximum numbers. Another example that I mentioned before is an MOQ, right? Okay, good. So that's how min-max works for the warehouse. You could, of course, also turn this to a transfer schedule of as needed, which we call min-max as well, and set our minimum and maximum FBA numbers, as well as our minimum and maximum warehouse numbers. And that's actually very common as well. Keep in mind there's a lot of moving parts here, and if you ever question the recommendations, please export your Excel spreadsheet and actually go through the inventory timeline and do the math and look at that spreadsheet and see why is it telling you to order these numbers. The last type of order schedule I want to talk about is the pass-through lead time. And that's where it looks like this. So on our order schedule, instead of having, I should say on our lead time, instead of having everything stop at the warehouse, sometimes people want inventory to go through a warehouse and actually end at Amazon. This is less common, but I'm seeing more and more of it these days, where the warehouse is acting more as a prep center and they never hold inventory. And they really just want the inventory to go through the warehouse for whatever reason and then end at Amazon. Now, if you truly want to keep 0 inventory at your warehouse, but you want to use the warehouse in your lead time, this is the only way to ensure that you're never going to keep anything at the warehouse. So in this case, I'll just leave my as needed stuff. That's irrelevant. I'm just showing you how the lead time works now. So I've got my order schedule, I've got my transfer schedule, and notice these recommendations here are actually going to completely ignore these numbers because we're not storing inventory at the warehouse anymore. We're only sending it through the warehouse based on these numbers. So a pass-through lead time is going to completely ignore your minimum and your maximum buffer stock numbers. I can put 30 in here, and I can put 900 days if I wanted to, for my warehouse, and those numbers are completely irrelevant because we're passing through and we're forcing 100% of that inventory through the warehouse into Amazon. So this order recommendation is always based on what I need at my FBA minimum and maximum numbers. Let's see how this works. So the order recommendation is here, and we've still got a 76-day lead time. And this is what it's going to look like. It's just going to land at the warehouse and immediately be transferred out. This is called the prep center. That's generally why people do this. And then it arrives a few days later based on my lead time. I'm no longer using my transfer time anymore, which is 10 days, as you notice, because this is actually, the transfer is built in to my lead time. 3 plus 2 is 5. And as you can see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's called a pass-through lead time. And this is the only way that you can truly ensure that you're never going to have any inventory stored at your warehouse. If you just want that inventory going through the warehouse, nothing left behind, no inventory there collecting storage fees at your 3PL, then use a pass-through lead time. So those are the 4 or 5 ways that you can kind of set up your order and transfer schedules. I hope you found that helpful, especially with using the min-max numbers and the export. Cheers.